of Representatives, representing Texas's 11th Congressional District, who announced his run to become GOP nominee for President of the United States this past July. He's known by many as the intellectual godfather of the Tea Party movement. Our guest has called for reductions in government that go well beyond those advocated by other so-called conservatives. He wants to abolish most federal agencies, including the IRS and the Federal Reserve, and to return our monetary system to something akin to a gold standard. He has proposed a constitutional amendment that would abolish personal income, estate and gift taxes, and prohibit the government from engaging in business and competition with the private sector. It was back in 2002, he was among the 6 Republicans who voted against giving President George W. Bush authority to use military force in Iraq. He said the resolution was unconstitutional because it transferred the right to declare war from Congress to the executive branch. So he has remained a consistent critic of military interventions in foreign lands, and in 2010, he and Massachusetts Democrat Barney Frank campaigned for cuts in the defense budget to help trim the deficit. He takes a dim view of foreign aid generally. He opposes U.S. support for the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization, and generally favors a U.S. withdrawal from the United Nations. Some have said that our speaker's libertarian beliefs make him an erratic ally of other GOP causes. He has said that he believes marriage is the union of one man and one woman. He voted in 2004 and 2006 against a proposed constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage, saying everyone is an individual and ought to be treated equally. He also backed repeal in late 2010 of the statutory ban on gays and lesbians serving openly in the military. At odds with many other libertarians, he opposes abortion. Our guest also ran for president in 2008, but he decided this time around to put all of his energies into the 2012 race, vowing that he would not seek a 12th term in Congress. Originally from Pittsburgh, our speaker graduated from Gettysburg College and the Duke University School of Medicine. He moved to Texas in 1968 and began his medical practice as a specialist in obstetrics and gynecology. He entered politics in the 1970s and won a seat in Congress. In 1984, he voluntarily relinquished his House seat and returned to his medical practice. Returning to Congress in 1997 to represent the 14th Congressional District of Texas, he serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Financial Services Committee, and is chairman of the Subcommittee on Domestic Monetary Policy and Technology. Our speaker is also the author of several books, including The Revolution, Manifesto, End the Fed, Liberty Defined, Challenge to Liberty, The Case for Gold, and A Republic, If You Can Keep It. I'll say that we are grateful that he accepted our invitation to speak, because here at the club, we believe it's important that the National Press Club contribute to a civil discussion of important issues of our day, with the election process chief among them. Please give a warm National Press Club welcome to Congressman Ron Paul.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction and that nice reception. I am honored that I received an invitation to speak here today, so I'm very pleased to be here and look forward to visiting with you. You know, before I get into my remarks, I did want to make one announcement with the campaign. I'm not very good at remembering the details of campaigning because I get really very much involved in economic policy and foreign policy, and I don't talk a whole lot about the intricacies of the campaign. But you know, we did just end a quarter for fundraising, and the reports will be out, I think, on the 15th. But we do have pretty sound numbers that we have on the amount of money we collected. And I've been told by the staff that we have collected over $8 million, and also that our number of donors to the campaign now is over 100,000. So we are very pleased with that and believe that will give us the energy to keep the campaign moving right along, since right now there's a lot of energy with our volunteers and with our organization, and we have a lot of energy associated with our young people on college campuses, so that will continue. But I do want to spend some time today to get started in the discussion is on economic policy, because in the campaign, economic policy right now is the big issue, and the issue of jobs and why we're in a recession and what exactly is going on. 4 years ago, this subject came up, and even in '07, I was talking about being in a recession, and this was sort of fluffed off. Things have changed a whole lot. My concerns about the monetary system, the Federal Reserve System, the unemployment rate, the financial bubbles that we were experiencing early on have all come about where the average person on the street knows there's something very seriously wrong. And this is not like another recession. We've had 17 setbacks, recession types, some more severe than others, since we've had our Federal Reserve System. So this whole idea that the Federal Reserve is supposed to be the major participant in central economic planning, and they're supposed to give us stable prices, and they're supposed to give us full employment. I would say the evidence is out there. They haven't done a very good job. And even though they might give you statistics and say, well, yes, prices aren't going up that much. Actually, we would like them to go up a little faster, and we only have 2% inflation when they measure prices and CPI. But that is a fiction, and I think most people know it. If you go back to the old calculation of CPI, and if you look to the free market economists, you will find that prices are going up at a rate of about 9%, and for some people in the economy it goes up even faster. So everybody's inflation rate is not all the same. So, you know, if you're a very wealthy person, you don't really care about the price of gasoline and other things. But if you're living on the margin, or you're a retired person, it's a very serious matter. Right now, retirees are suffering a whole lot because the last two go-arounds, they didn't get a cost of living increase, claiming that there's no price inflation to worry about. But my challenge over the many years and my motivation to get involved in politics in the 1970s had to do with economic policy in relationship to the principle of personal liberty. I deal with, if somebody asks me what my main goal is, and that is to restore individual liberty to everybody in this country equally. And then you would have a special way of looking at all civil liberties. You would have a special idea about what kind of foreign policy we should have, but certainly it would tell us what kind of an economic policy that we would have. So I believe in the free market. I believe the free market is the only humane system that can provide the maximum benefits to the maximum number of people. And I reject central economic planning. My whole problem in a political sense is that we are now witnessing the failure of an economic system that has been with us especially since the 1930s, because basically we as a people in our universities have been taught Keynesian economics, and that's planned economy, and the Federal Reserve has become the big central economic planner. But the results right now and the demonstrations on the streets, not only around the world but here in the United States, demonstrates that there's a lot of people who are pretty upset, know there's something wrong, and they want something different. But the big goal is to define exactly why and how we got into this mess and what we have to do to get out of it. The whole theory behind free market economics is that the Federal Reserve is the key instrument for the business cycle. Their job is to monkey around and fix interest rates, the price of money. Most people in this country, most economists, conservative or liberal, are no longer pushing wage and price controls. That doesn't mean they might not try that later on, because wage and price controls are coming in medicine, and that's one of the problems we have already, and we'll have it much worse. But nobody really is out there saying wage and price controls is something that is beneficial. But when it comes to fixing the price of money, fixing the interest rates, nobody asks any questions. I mean, they just assume, well, the Federal Reserve knows what's best. They know exactly how much money there should be. They know what the interest rate should be. And yet, in free market economics, we have come to understand that prices are key. The price of a product tells the businessman and the consumer what to do. If the price is too high, the consumer doesn't buy. And then the businessman knows what to do. So without that, socialism is destined to fail. And this is what a free market economist by the name of von Mises in 1912 predicted. So he predicted the default of a communist system before it was actually really, at its best level. It was yet to come, but socialism was, explained to never work, and it didn't work, and we've seen the failure of it. The only question now is whether interventionism which is what we have today, how long it will last. But money is one half of every single transaction, and yet we don't question the fact that, a couple individuals secretly, 12 people get together and say, oh, I wonder what the money supply should be this week. Oh, there's a crisis going on. Let's double the money supply. Let's create $15 trillion worth of bailouts. Who gets the bailouts? Oh, the people who are too big to fail. The people who are too little to worry about, they go and they lose their jobs and they lose their houses. This is all done behind the scenes. The Federal Reserve is bigger and spends more money than the Congress does. And there's no oversight. And this is one of the reasons I have for years and years argued for oversight. Back in the 70s, it was Henry Royce, a chairman of the Banking Committee, wanted to do it. And Henry Gonzalez, another Democratic chairman, he tried to get it done. It hasn't been done. But we are making inroads due to the lawsuits that have come up and due to a very partial audit that we had last summer. So we are getting some information. The information isn't good. The Fed was involved with probably about $15 trillion worth of transactions, and a third of it was there to serve foreign banks. And when the American people hear this, no wonder they're up on Wall Street raising Cain, because they know that the system is biased against the average person. And I think this is an issue that really questions the whole idea of the interventionist system. And what I said at my opening remarks was that the free market is the humane system. It's a humanitarian system. It is the very best. And yet it is we who argue for limited government and free markets are always saying, well, you guys don't care. You just put people in the gutter. You won't give them anything for free. And this is the result. Well, the result is that the system we have today, whether it's the recession or the result of a financial bubble, just think of the housing programs. We had easy money, easy credit, lower interest rate. Everybody was to have a house. And not only did the Fed make the money available, then there were the affirmative action programs telling the banks they had to make bad loans. And it seemed to work. People were buying houses. It was fantastic. The price of houses would go up and they'd borrow more against it. And people didn't know there was, I don't know how anybody could miss it, that there was a bubble out there. So they continued to do that. And then the bubble bursting, and was predictable by free market economics. It comes and what happens? Yelling and screaming and scaring the people. There's going to be a depression. There's going to be a depression if you don't bail out. Bail out the rich. Bail out the corporations. Bail out the banks. Bail out the foreign banks. They didn't get the depression. They got the bailout. What did the Fed buy? They have $1 trillion worth of securities, these derivative type of securities. Why don't they sell them? Well, they're worthless. So instead of liquidating debt, which is necessary in a bubble in order to get back to growth again, we only just transfer the penalty from the wealthy and the Wall Streeters over to the people. But what happened to all this wonderful idea of giving the people a house? They lost their job. They couldn't pay their mortgages, and now they're losing their houses, and there's no end in sight. And the basic flaw in this is the prevention of politicians from allowing the markets to correct, because politicians can't act with hands off. They have to do something. Prior to the 1930s, there were recessions and depressions, and it usually came because of distortion of money and credit and pyramiding debt, and the correction had to come. But at that time, there was not this Keynesian obsession with bailing out people, so the depression would last a short period of time. In 1929, the recession lasted for, 1921, the recession, depression lasted for a year. We don't even study it in history books. But in the 1930s, that is when the Keynesian interventionists had come in vogue, and you had to do something, and it started with Hoover, and then it went into Roosevelt, and it gave us a depression that really didn't end until 1947. This idea that war ends depression, it's a distasteful idea that still floats around. Have a war and get rid of the depression. Yes, it gets rid of unemployment, but where are the people employed? Carrying guns and getting shot at and getting killed. But real growth didn't come until about 1947. That was after millions of troops came home. The military budget was slashed in more than half. Taxes went down 30%. We went back to work again. But we're doing the same thing that the Japanese have been doing for a couple decades, propping up bad debt. And that's the most difficult thing that we have to deal with, is allowing these mistakes to be corrected. Now, these ideas have floated around a long time, and they are connected to those ideas of personal liberty, because we should see people as individuals and not in groups. It was mentioned in the introduction about who can and who cannot serve in the military, and I see that as those problems that we've had in the past is too often we see people, well, in the very long past, people were mistreated because they belonged to certain groups, which was very evil. But now we still see people trying to gain advantage. Well, I belong to this group or this group or this group. And a person that understands personal liberty sees everybody as an individual. And it has nothing to do with the group that you belong to. And it is a system of thought that is very tolerant. In many ways, it's the way we look at our First Amendment. We're very tolerant about our First Amendment in many ways, because what we do is we say, well, you can say things, and the First Amendment is there to protect you to say controversial things, and we don't question the fact that you can study very, very vicious philosophies. Just think of how many millions, hundreds of millions of people were killed by communists in the 20th century, but we don't outlaw that. So often people are annoyed when I talk about personal liberty, is they get annoyed. Well, somebody might use their personal liberty to practice a habit that I can't endorse. Legalizing people to make freedom of choices, as long as it doesn't hurt other people, is not an endorsement. Because you can read something and you have the First Amendment rights, that doesn't mean we endorse those things. I mean, if we can allow individuals to pick and choose their intellectual lives and their spiritual lives, why is it we gotten to this point that we are obsessed with regulating people's personal habits and dependent on the government that we tend to complain about so much, that the government will always take care of us? We've now accepted the notion that governments can protect us from ourselves. And it's very, very dangerous. And it's a careless attitude about civil liberties. But we need to, of course, look at other policies. I've talked a little bit about the Federal Reserve and the importance of sound money, but a couple other reasons why you want sound money. If you happen to be opposed to massive expansion of the government, whether it's the entitlement system or the perpetual wars that we're in, you can't be for a gold standard or limitation, because that's the way you finance it. That's the way it's been done for thousands of years. They've known about debasing the currency and diluting the metal and clipping coins. Today, it isn't just printing money. We just use a computer. But it cannot be financed. These wars would have never started if we'd had to tax the American people. The founders did their very best to try to put the control of us going to war in the hands of the people in a Congress, never in the hands of the executive branch and in the hands of the king or the president. And yet today the Congress have graciously given up that prerogative, and the people, they don't seem to care, and they listen to the war propaganda. Listen to the war propaganda going on currently. I mean, we're on the verge of going to war against the Iranians and the Pakistanis. We have 7,000 drone missiles stationed around the world. And we assume that we can drop those any place we want, anytime we want. And guess what? Sometimes innocent people die. And sometimes those innocent people, when they die, have families. And sometimes they get very annoyed by that. But the real irony of this stationing bases with drones around the world, both the CIA as well as the 9/11 Commission acknowledged the fact that a significant event that helped prompt the 9/11 attack was the fact that we had military bases on what was considered Holy Land in Saudi Arabia. So immediately after 9/11, we took that military base out. And the CIA has talked about blowback for a long time, and the Commission acknowledged this. But guess what? We're loading up the Arabian Peninsula with these cruise missiles, these drones and cruise missiles. You think it's going to go unnoticed? No, it's not going to go unnoticed. There are more suicide attacks in 1 month against American interests and Americans around the world, not in our country, around the world in 1 month than they incurred in the entire period of time prior to 9/11. So we're under direct threat. It's very dangerous. It's going to get worse. And accepting the fact that the president needs more authority to pursue this war that is undeclared against everybody, any place in the world. Oh, well, what the president needs is more authority. He can now assassinate people without due process, American citizens, and people cheer it. I mean, what is going on with this country? And if it would make us perfectly safe and rich, and we have to sacrifice our liberties, it'd be pretty tough. But it's exactly the opposite is happening. Exactly the opposite. We are less free, and we're certainly broke. These wars have cost us $4 trillion, and that is a major contributing factor to our national debt. But this is not new. This is what's happened throughout history. Empires, they get too big, they spread themselves too thinly around the world, and they self-destruct, just as the Soviet system did. There is no more chance of us having what people think could be a victory in Afghanistan and the man on the moon. There's no chance whatsoever. All we have is drain our resources. Just the other day up in New Hampshire, we had a significant group of veterans. Many of them came back from Iraq and Afghanistan, supporting my candidacy. And it's one area where I am very pleased to announce also that if you add up all the donations to all the other Republican candidates, from military, active duty people, I get twice as much, because they're sick and tired of these wars and they know they're not working out. One young man that came the other day, he was practically in tears and talking about all his buddies that he lost in Afghanistan. And you know what his concern was now, which is something nobody cares about. It's hardly written about. It's all his buddies. So many of his buddies now are committing suicide because of the long-term consequences. And what about the 8,500 who died, the 40,000 with severe injuries, hundreds of thousands begging and pleading for help at the Veterans Administration, and we want to go and start more wars? I mean, what did Gates say when he left DOD? He said, the Defense Department, he said, anybody who wants to start another war under these conditions needs their head examined. And we need our heads opened up. We need our brains opened up. We need to pay a little attention to what's going on. That's what we really need. And it is going to happen. Economically, it's happening. That's what the demonstrations are all about on the streets. And one of these days, the people are going to wake up and connect the excessive spending that we do in these wars overseas and our economic decline here in this country. So I believe very sincerely that we're in a crisis period of time right now, that it's going to be a do or die situation. We are at a point where I think we've essentially, hopefully I'm wrong, essentially have crossed the Rubicon. You know, we have crossed that barrier from republic to dictatorship, to tyranny, to empire. We have our empire. We're in 150 countries. We have 900 bases around the world, and people are egging for more war. So we do have the empire. But what about the financing? What happens in a dictatorship? They have monopoly control of the creation of money and credit, and they have that through the monetary system that we have. Also, it's the loss of civil liberties, whether it's the loss of civil liberties with our war on drugs or our IRS or the war on terror. What privacy do we have yet? Today they're talking about the institutionalizing. The government can call up all cell phones because there's $1 trillion worth of loans out there for the students who aren't ever going to be able to pay them. They can't even get jobs. So what we're going to do is deliver all the telephone numbers to the government so they can bug all these kids that have been abused and say, when are you going to pay your bills? I mean, we've lost our privacy. We have an announced program of assassinating American citizens. We're in perpetual war, and we've essentially lost, our republic. And so this has to be reversed rather quickly. Without a strict adherence to the rule of law, let me tell you, things go downhill, and I believe that is the case. So my advocacy is for the cause of liberty, the cause for which America stood one time, the cause of sound money and free markets, and trying to get people to get their courage back again and say, oh no, if the government doesn't do it, it's going to be destroyed. Yes, the government gave houses to everybody and they gave free education to everybody. Now they're in a dilemma and they have to follow up on the consequences of this. We have lost our understanding. There's a better understanding now of the free market economists and sound money than ever before. The evidence is quite clear about what the founders were talking about, a non-interventionist foreign policy, mind our own business. We can't solve the problems of the world. We can't go into nation building. These fights have been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So we are going to be forced to make changes, and there's no reason we can't make positive changes. We can get out of this, but we have to change policy. We cannot do it with the same monetary policy, the same economic policy, and the same foreign policy. That is just a figment of an imagination. If you think you can do this, you can't tinker on the edges. We don't have a budgetary crisis. We have a crisis in our understanding of what the role of government ought to be. The budget is the symptom. The taxes are the symptoms. We have to ask one way or the other, what should the role of government be? Is it to take care of us from cradle to grave and police the world and tell us what to do with our personal lives? Or is it to protect our liberties and give us sound money and enforce contracts and protect property rights? There's a big difference. And it is that part that made our country great and prosperous that we are giving up. We are seeing it disappear before our eyes. And young people know it. The young people are awakening. They know they need something new and different, and they are coming and they're listening and they're studying about the foreign policy, and they're sick and tired of what they're inheriting. So I would say that there's every reason for me personally to be very optimistic for the changes that have come about here in the last several years. So I will continue to do this. I will continue to do the campaigning, and quite frankly, I feel pretty optimistic about how the campaign is going. Thank you very much.